listeners. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 157. Even though last time was episode 158, we got rescheduled because of Gartner IM. But finally, we're here. The topic today is TPRM needs an intervention. And our guest today is Kamal Govindaswamy, co-founder and partner of Turris. Welcome, Kamal.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the time you took to invite me and having the opportunity to have this discussion. I think it's a very important topic and looking forward to it.
Yeah, and it's been really, really interesting reading your articles and posts. And when I started reading them, I realized I have to have Kamal on this show. So I'm glad you joined us today. But before we dive into sort of the topic, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. I've been a security consultant for about 25 years now, pretty much the entire century, 21st century, right? I started my consulting career at a Big Four here in the Chicago area. Was there for about 5.5 years before I went on to start my own consulting firm, and then more recently, in 2017, I joined forces with Dan Goldstein, my co-founder and partner, to found TRS. We are a security and privacy services consulting firm. We, at least on the security side, we focus essentially on what I refer to as helping our customers with realizing what I refer to as meaningful outcomes, so to speak, right? So in that regard, we tend to focus more on the strategy and operationalizing the strategy in terms of outcomes side of things of security, as opposed to deeper technology implementations such as identity management and what have you. So again, our focus is on delivering outcomes, defining how cybersecurity programs can translate their strategies in actionable terms to realize those outcomes over time. So that's the focus. And third-party risk management certainly has been one of my focus areas for the last few years. And I'm glad to have this opportunity to be speaking on the topic today.
Yeah, and so the audience of Identity Office Hours might not be all that familiar with third-party risk management. It's sort of, you would think it's intimately related because of the whole idea of federation is we're crossing domain boundaries and working with third parties.
That's right.
But it is sort of an adjacent market to, let's say, IAM or IGA. Maybe as a starting point, you could describe like what is a TPRM program and why have traditional TPRM programs maybe failed to measure risk accurately?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. So again, just so the audience knows, so I do have a background in identity and access management as well. So I certainly recognize some of the challenges that IAM overall has, and certainly the IGA implementations, right? I used to do some implementations myself back in the day, and therefore I recognize the challenges there. Now, to answer your question in terms of third-party risk management itself, as to why there have been some challenges there as it relates to security. First of all, third-party risk management as the program is implemented at most organizations, it is usually broader in scope. Many times it is run by procurement functions within organizations,
Yeah.
right? And cybersecurity is one component of risk management, as you can imagine, right? When
Okay.
organizations, hire vendors or third parties or partners, they look to understand the big picture of the risk potentially posed by the third party, and therefore cybersecurity, while it is an important component of the risk, but it is not the only component, right? People tend to look at the reputational risk, any risk that the third party might have in terms of ethics and things of that nature. I'm sure the audience has heard the term ESG, right? Environmental, social,
Sure.
governance, I think of the nature. So
How green you are, basically.
that's right. So TPRM covers a wide variety of areas, and therefore, the program itself is broad in scope. But when it comes to understanding the cybersecurity risks posed by the third parties, whether it is vendors, partners, what have you, I think the approach that organizations have taken have been somewhat less pointed than it should be, right? To kind of put it in a term that I like to explain it, and the reason is because unlike other risk areas, cybersecurity risk is fairly agile because you know I like to use the term outcomes that matter. So all that matters in security is that we make sure that we don't end up on a headline tomorrow, right? So if you think about that, there are so many things that we need to do on a day-to-day basis. Uh, and because there are so many things that we need to do, we need to exactly know in terms of priority as to what we need to do first before we focus on the next one and the later ones, right?
Mhm.
And the reason and because the nature and extent of tasks that any particular cybersecurity program needs to do, including assessing third parties in terms of the risks that are posed by third parties, is so large. Most security programs a have a challenge in terms of doing things in the right order of priority. In other words, focusing on what really matters first before they begin to focus on the later ones, right? So that's been in a single sentence, the challenge with third party risk management, right? So and if you think about the mechanics that cybersecurity programs have traditionally used for third party risk management, I would put those into essentially three different categories, right? One, many organizations require their third parties to have some sort of a certification or an attestation, right? Audit or something like that.
SOC
You
2, for
SOC,
example.
SOC 2, for example, and there are, of course, a number of others depending upon the industry. Um, the second mechanic or method that organizations use would be sending vendors questionnaires, which of course
Mhm.
has got its own challenges, right? Because the questionnaires could be very disparate in nature in terms of what they're asking, as well as they could be fairly repetitive, right? You might
I'm laughing because as a vendor, I'm on this side of it, and I get these questionnaires, and our
exactly,
CISO specifically is engaged to answer them. Yeah.
yeah. So it's not a pleasant experience when you're a vendor, and I would say it is not exactly a productive experience when you're a customer as well, because you're sending questionnaires to all vendors. They're sending you responses, many of them templated, for obvious
And
reasons,
let's be clear about the economic incentives here when you're answering that questionnaire.
right?
That questionnaire is a hurdle to you closing a deal.
Exactly,
So if you're hoping for like good responses,
right.
there's a sort of economic misalignment there, I would think.
That's right. And then the third method or mechanic that organizations tend to use is certainly for some more prominent or higher risk vendors, depending upon the ticket of the contract and things of that nature, right? Size of the contract and things of that nature, they might decide to perform more involved assessments, right? Either remotely or sometimes even on-site assessments with the vendors,
Mhm.
right? So if you think about all this, the motivation, if you look at it from a vendor standpoint, is obviously for them to kind of pass this hurdle, as Mike you rightly said, so that they can sign a deal and then keep the deal, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Now the thing is, once a vendor gets the deal and signs, is already, working with the customer, has a foot in the door. It's very difficult for the customers to kind of throw away a vendor and go with another vendor, depending upon, of course, the nature of the vendor's business with the customer, um, right? And therefore, the ongoing risk management is going to be fairly, um, I would say, not as pointed and productive as well in that regard, right? Because even if you find something that is of a higher risk nature with a vendor, what are you going to be able to do in terms of having the vendor remediate them and things of that nature, especially when you're using, again, questionnaires requiring them to attain certifications or attestations, and then even perhaps performing assessments, right? So all of these things are going to just take more time, both for the customer as well as the vendor. And at the same time, you're not able to pinpoint exactly what the vendor needs to do right now or within the next week or two in order to mitigate the more prominent risks that they have, right? And the result of all this is very clear for everyone to see. So if you look at most prominent breaches out there that are announced, over time. Most vendors, and this includes some of the big vendors that are Fortune 100 kind of vendors as well. They all carry a number of certifications, not just at the time of the breach, but also for several years before the breach, right? So if you think about why is it that a vendor who has apparently gone through so much effort in getting those certifications and maintaining those certifications is potentially answering a number of vendor customer questionnaires day in and day
Mhm.
out, and also going through many of the involved
Went
assessments which we
wrong.
put in. Yeah, right. Why would, yeah, why would they, what is the reason why they incur these breaches, right?
Mhm.
If you think about it in those terms, I think it is easy enough to come to the conclusion that these exercises, the three mechanics that I talked about, essentially end up, um, you know, you know, taking up vendors' time and resources on doing things that don't result in meaningful outcomes.
And in your, I love the description to this episode because
Yeah,
you write, demonstrably counterproductive mechanisms and practices are
that's right.
deeply entrenched, which ignore the realities.
That's
Is
right.
that sort of what you're saying here?
Exactly. These three mechanics are
Why
demonstrably
are they not
counterproductive.
only not effective, but actually counterproductive? Because you're going a step further when you say that
Mhm.
they're actually counterproductive.
Counterproductive because I actually use a term called cyber economics. So that the definition for the term is essentially this, right? Which is um, most cybersecurity programs, including cybersecurity programs at very well resourced Fortune 10 organizations, they only have a limited amount of time and budget and resources
Yeah,
to
yeah,
deploy,
it's like the
right?
time versus the human life. You can be
Right.
rich, but you can't get more time.
Right. So that being the case, if you have vendors involving themselves in answering questionnaires, getting certifications day in and day out,
Mhm.
maintaining those certifications, going through these assessments, remote or on-site, what have you, you are essentially, at least in my view of things, and this is very easy to prove as well, essentially diverting their time and resources to these three things, and not necessarily having them focus on identifying the top risks and working to remediate those risks, right?
So it's
Because
like a signal to noise problem.
that's
Like
right.
you're creating more noise, and
Right.
so you're making it harder for them to find the signal, not
Exactly.
easier, not identifying the signal. Yeah,
Exactly. And therefore, in the it is certainly, I mean, those three mechanics are certainly counterproductive in that regard, right?
yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit to your some of your 10 principles.
Yep.
And I thought that was a very good PDF. It's referenced in the homework. And by the way, I'll just flash the link. All Glue episodes have the same URL. It's glue.co/IOH-157. It's where the notes are. We'll try and put that in the comments and check out the wiki page for links to other episodes. Um, so these 10 principles, I guess, of cyber TPM, third party risk management, TPRM.
Right.
Um, so the first principle is accountability. And so I wanted to ask you,
Mhm.
why did you make accountability? Why is accountability the first principle? And what does that mean to you?
That's right. So accountability is the topmost because uh, unless the vendor organization or third party organization has a tone at the top set right, things are not going to work down below further, right? So by accountability I mean that right at the CEO or the board level, there is a definitive focus and constant emphasis on the organization doing the right things in terms of identifying the risks and mitigating those risks in a prioritized fashion and in a timely fashion, so that the organization again does not end up on the headline the next day,
Hmm.
uh, and therefore put all of its customers at risk in the context of TPRM, right? Unless there is a good tone at the top, and when I say at the tone at the top, it's just not um, a lip service, if you will, so to speak, right? Clearly, when we talk about tone at the top and accountability at the highest level at the CEO or the board level, we expect them to allocate appropriate resources to the CISO organization and to the organization in general, so that they can um, uh, undertake appropriate business as usual risk management, right? Including for third party risk management, if you will. That's the reason
How,
why it is at the top.
how would you see that differing across a range of vendors? Because we have vendors who are going to be small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and huge, large businesses.
Right.
And what would you expect what does accountability look like, given the different sizes of the vendors that you're working with?
So in general, the tone at the top, first of all, again, a great follow-up question there. Um, in principle, there is there shouldn't be any difference between the organizations, regardless of their size or nature. Um, the difference is, I think, going to be in the resources that the organization is going to have, right, to kind of translate that tone at the top, so to speak, in terms of the actual capabilities on a day-to-day basis. And that's just the practical reality, right? Every organization is going to be different in terms of their capabilities and resources and budgets, and therefore, um, what's important is for the organization to be able to identify in a prioritized fashion as to what they need to do first before they get to a lesser priority risk for mitigation. And it's almost always the case that not every organization, in fact most organizations, will not be able to address all risks at any point in time. That's just a simple fact, right? Because there is going to be constraints in terms of resources, time, and what have you, right? But
So, just to press pause there for a
yeah,
second.
yeah,
So, if it's a small business, it's about at least this smaller size business is aware of the top risks and is addressing the top risks to the best of their ability, so
right.
that they're aware of it and there's an effort to prioritize and address risks.
Yep,
And nobody can eliminate risks. No business of any size can eliminate all the risks. So, but
that's
you
right.
just want to make sure that there's a program to understand what those risks are and to do to prioritize them correctly. Is that right?
Exactly. So, um, the best story any organization can tell, uh, either themselves internally or to any external third party, whether it's a regulator or a customer or what have you, is the fact that they have, first of all, set a tone at the top in terms of accountability, and they
Hmm.
have allocated um, appropriate resources given the constraints that they have, right? Given the means that they have in terms of budgets and what have you, and can demonstrate that they have either already mitigated those risks in the order of priority, or they have a
Hmm.
plan to mitigate the ones that have not been mitigated yet, right? So demonstrating what you're doing or what you have done is just as important as the act of doing it itself, if that makes sense, right? That's kind of how I would look at this. Um, and again, it is important to recognize that cybersecurity in general, and certainly cybersecurity risk management, including third-party risk management, can never be a perfect um, exercise, right? Because there is always going to be a set of risks that are going to remain unmitigated. But what is important is for every organization to know what is left to be mitigated, and then have a good story to tell in terms of whether that's going to be mitigated, or if it's not going to be mitigated, how they have compensated for that, or when they're going to mitigate it at some point in time in the future.
This might be outside of the scope of the conversation a little bit, but in order to be able to prioritize, you have to be able to measure the risk and
Exactly.
know which are the biggest risks. But prioritization, I think, also maybe needs to include the reward side of the equation. So it's some things might have bigger risks, but there also is more reward. So it's understandable why you're undertaking those. How would you advise the vendors to actually measure the risk and understand like, is there ever a time where it might be justified to take a big risk,
Yeah,
or is this about just risk elimination?
right. So the first question about measuring the risk, that's where um, the other document that I published, which is I use the hashtag, the point about cybermetrics on LinkedIn. So
Hmm.
that's a 5-page PDF, I think it is, that I published a year ago, um, and that has an actionable framework for how organizations can implement their risk management program so that they can identify risks in an objective fashion, in a prioritized fashion, and then have resources allocated to mitigate the risks in a priority order, right? And readers will know when they study, when they go through the document, they will see that the basis for all this is really to use an industry consensus kind of a framework. And I use the term risk relevant framework. You'll see that, and by using an industry consensus framework, everybody understands, whether it is customers, vendors, third parties. Everybody in the industry understands as to uh, 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 what are the top risks that need to be addressed in that, as everybody understands in the industry. And then when the vendor chooses to identify a risk that is meant to be a top risk and they're working on it, the customers in general would understand that they what the vendor is doing, right, as opposed to having to unnecessarily undertake assessment activities on the vendors, or having the vendor to explain to the customer as they why they chose to address a particular risk as opposed to the others. That makes sense. So that industry consensus is extremely important for a framework, and that's what the point about cybermetrics covers.
Yeah, maybe we should digress there for a moment. I had some questions at the end about this, but we'll just jump to the end and address some of these now. Um, so one of the things you talked about is shared exchanges, or what I would call multi-party federations, I guess
Yep,
within a supply chain or
that's right.
ecosystems of partners and vendors, and how that can be helpful to, I guess, define schema and to define challenges. But it's actually very difficult to coalesce or catalyze these third party exchanges. It's a project that never ends. Like it's not a project where you started at this date and it ends at this date. This type of exchange would be ongoing, right? And so the question is, how do you fund it? Who leads it? Um, so where do you see these types of exchanges in the real world? Like, what are some of the early adopter industries that maybe have these exchanges?
Yep.
And where do you see sort of some of the likely next exchanges or multi-party federations that might actually um, be born?
Yeah, good question. So, I think this is probably where there is a little bit of a tie-in to some of the identity and access management topics, right? So, certainly in the context of federation. Now, talking about exchanges in particular, a few years ago, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe even earlier than that, there was a general trend in every industry pretty much. Certainly, the financial services, healthcare, and a few other industries for TPRM solution vendors. So we're talking about product solution vendors, um, and I won't take names. They established private exchanges, for lack of a better term, right? Their own
Mhm,
exchanges where they would host um, the responses, the third-party risk management assessment or questionnaire responses of the vendors that are customers of theirs, right?
mhm,
And the idea was that any customer who seeks to engage or contract with a vendor that is a customer of the third party risk management solution vendor who hosts the exchange would go to the exchange and then access the third party risk management questionnaire responses or an assessment response, right? And therefore
mhm,
would assess the vendor that way. And also that will also, at least in theory, help the customer from having to undertake their own assessments or send their own
mhm,
questionnaires directly to the vendors, right? So that was the idea behind those private exchanges. For whatever reason, and this is, I think, is probably not too difficult to understand, they were uh, it was it didn't, this initiative by these private exchanges did not go too far. I think the most prominent reason why it did not is because, first of all, there were many vendors, there were many exchanges.
mhm,
None of them had any ability for one to interact with the other. There was really no federation in the identity management sense between those
Hmm.
exchanges. And if you think about
So a
uh,
lot of walled gardens.
right, exactly. And then, yeah, if you think about it from a customer standpoint, um, more than likely, if they were looking to hire a set of vendors, those vendors probably existed in different exchanges, right? So
Hmm.
any customer, any particular customer would need to go to each exchange, access the questionnaires or responses from each of those exchanges. So all of this made things very difficult, you know, to state
Hmm.
simply, right? And it just became a non-starter primarily because it was not a productive exercise. It was not an efficient exercise. It was certainly not something that was sustainable in the longer run. And again, because these were private exchanges, there was always going to be an aspect of conflict of risk as it relates to each product vendor uh, trying to keep everything close to their chest, so to speak, right? um, and maybe that was one of the reasons why there was there was no effort towards interoperability between exchanges. So that has been the challenge as it relates to private exchanges. But what I'm proposing today, though, um, since the last 2 years, that is to avoid having private exchanges or using private exchanges. Instead, have what I refer to as a public-private partnership body in each industry. So
Hmm.
essentially, if I can take
IEF Federation.
that's right. So
Yeah.
if I can use the example of healthcare, a good candidate for that body would be um, the Health Sector Coordination Council. So that is a body that's been sponsored by the federal U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, but
Hmm.
it really relies on the industry organizations, right? The hospital systems, insurance organizations, and things of that nature, uh, collaborating with each other and with this organization, the Healthcare Sector Coordination Council, to kind of arrive at decisions that are based on consensus and are risk relevant, right? So my proposal with the point about cybermetrics is that um, each industry has this one single public-private partnership body, and that body gets to maintain these risk-relevant security control frameworks. They also define the metrics associated with or required for measuring and managing each controller outcome, right, in the framework, and then make all this information openly available to everyone in the industry, right? Because there shouldn't be any secret, because the more there is a tendency to kind of keep things close to your chest, the less effective, sustainable, to use my term, is it going to be, right? Sustainable.
Transparency is one of the key metrics for governance in general, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Um,
So that's
so,
my thought regarding exchanges, so to speak.
so not just the metrics though, but maybe the assessment content itself must be standardized. Um,
That's right. So
is
so the
that not the case today?
it's not. So today, there is no mandate for uh, public-private, public-private partnership bodies, like I mentioned a moment ago. There is certainly no mandate for those bodies to maintain these frameworks, metrics associated with the framework, as well as the assessment content associated with the framework that everyone in the industry can use. And there is certainly no mandate for organizations in industry overall to use a common framework or questionnaire, for the entire industry, right? So if you think about it, having that common risk relevant framework that everyone in the industry uses is going to be somewhat foundational to achieving the efficiencies, effectiveness, and what have you, right? What I refer to as three components of sustainable cyber. So meaning effectiveness, efficiency, and scalability, right? So it should be anything that is mandated for third-party risk management should be scalable across organizations, regardless of their size or nature. Now, granted that every organization has its own resources, we talked about that earlier, but the content itself should be standardized and scalable, right?
Mhm.
So that's the idea, and for this to happen, the regulators need to jump into the fray, right? They need to go back and look at what they're contemplating and demanding, or have been demanding historically in terms of
Or
mandates.
regulations, one way to do it. You could do it through mutual agreement in the federation or in
Right,
the exchange.
right.
The stock exchange members are regulated, but they have a lot of internal things that address how they do businesses, for example.
That's right. Now, the reason why I bring in regulators into the mix is because um, the current regulations in most industries, and certainly in healthcare, for example, are very old, right? Like HIPAA security rule, which is the prominent and the
They're from the 90s?
it is, yeah, it is from the last century, right?
Yeah,
Essentially, um, and they made some cosmetic changes to it,
yeah.
after the High Tech Act of 2009, but that's really cosmetic, right? But
Still 15 years ago or
yeah,
16 years ago.
yeah, and yeah, that's right. So essentially, the HIPAA security rule, as it stands today, was something that was conceived more than 25 years ago, and we're talking about the days 25 years ago when most of healthcare was not electronic. Most
Hmm.
were on paper, and suddenly the security threat environment was nothing like what it is today, right?
Yeah,
So we're talking about a regulation that's completely outdated, and it has mandates that are simply an overhead, uh,
and counterproductive.
and counterproductive, to use that
Yeah,
term, right?
overheaded is the normal, but counterproductive is
Yeah,
not uncommon.
that's right.
Yeah,
So, and therefore, the regulators need to go back and do their own homework, right? And what I'm recommending in that open letter, which is, I believe, linked in the wiki page
yep. It's also
for,
on the wiki.
yeah, for
Yeah.
healthcare, is for the regulator to go back and essentially scrap HIPAA security rule, right? And
Yeah.
start over, right? Um, and start over all on the basis
I'm
of,
laughing, but it's a good idea. It's such an obviously good idea. I'm like, the reason I'm
right,
laughing is because I don't think it's going to happen, and then that's sad.
right.
Um,
Um, and and if you look at the open letter, it's the idea is for the regulator to kind of essentially repeal and replace the HIPAA security rule with something that is founded in public-private partnership, industry consensus, something always remaining risk relevant, because this public-private partnership body, through consensus and collaboration between the government and the industry organizations, will maintain that framework to be risk relevant, you know, um, on an ongoing basis, and make the risk relevant content available to the industry at large, so that everybody is on the same plate, so to speak, in terms of risk management, including for third party risk management, if that makes sense.
there's one of the threads that I liked from your ratings is the idea of measuring outcomes or
Yep.
looking at outcomes, not means.
Yep.
And I talk about declarative security. And I had a guest, a former Gartner analyst, Brian Iverson, on yesterday.
Yeah, I was listening to it actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was talking about imperative versus declarative.
Mhm.
Imperative being like you define the workflow and sort of code like what you do. Um, but maybe you could talk. I like the fact that you have different words for it, which means to me that you're coming from a different direction. But what is it about? How do you do what? So you want to look at the outcomes in your assessment, or maybe you could dig into that a little bit deeper. Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, you know, most organizations have historically, most cybersecurity programs have historically been focused on um, executing projects and solutions, right? So let's focus on this. Is probably a good segue into talking about identity and access management. Let's pick the example of IGA, because that is the elephant in the room in most cases, right? When it comes to the just the size of implementations, right, and the amount
Mhm.
of dollars that it consumes for any organization. So historically, if you think about IGA implementations, they are big ticket. They have taken a long time, and there have been probably more failures historically of IGA implementation than there have been successes, right? And if you think about why that happens, right?
A very pessimistic view, more failures than successes. I
Right.
think it's at least 50-50, but I'm sorry, I digress. Go
Right.
on.
No, no, no,
But,
yeah. I don't think it's me saying this because I think Gartner themselves have put out, um, I think they use the term distress for IGA implementations not too long ago.
uh-huh.
Um, I'm saying this based on
It's
my,
very hard to get it right. Yeah.
right, right. Um, so I'm saying that more than 50 just based on my own experience, perhaps not from more recent experiences but certainly going back a few years, right?
Hmm.
Because I've been part of some implementations myself. And when I say failures, I'm not necessarily talking about outright failures. It's implementations kind of failing to meet expectations fully, right?
Hmm.
So there could be various degrees of failure, so to speak, in that regard. But coming back to the question of why we don't realize the outcomes, it is primarily because we don't have ownership in place, so to speak, for most implementations, right? In terms of people ownership, process ownership, and being able to sustain that, um, with these implementations, right? Because historically, whenever an IGA implementation has gone south, I think people have been at least us practitioners in IIM, in the community, have had a tendency to point to people and process issues being the cause of failures of IGA
Hmm.
implementations. I think that is true, right? But how can we mitigate that issue as it stands today? My answer would be to kind of use appropriate, updated, what I refer to as cyber governance, right? So when I say cyber governance, I'm referring to really two things. One is the ownership of um, outcomes across lines of businesses and technology, right? Because when you're implementing an IGA solution to meet, let's say, the provisioning or the compliance needs of a particular line of business, we're not going to go too far with the implementation unless there is some level of ownership in that line of business, so to speak, or line of technology.
What could be an example of an outcome that
Yeah,
you might want to specify
right. So,
in a business unit?
yeah. So let's take the example of multi-factor authentication. I think I used that example in my PDF for the point about cybermetrics, right?
Hmm.
Um, so most security frameworks out there require um, implementing multi-factor authentication, right?
Hmm.
So people go about implementing multi-factor authentication, and when it comes to
And
um,
that's so vague, by the way. But
so
yes, go
so
on.
it's so vague. Now on the other hand, if we went, so that's essentially implementing multi-factor authentication solutions, in my view of things, is a mean to achieving the outcome of stronger authentication wherever it matters,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Right. So that's kind of how I would
I was going to say when.
yeah, yeah, when and wherever it matters, right?
Yeah,
um,
to use the restroom, you must be MFA'd.
that's right. So uh, now, to talk about the outcome in this example, uh, instead of asking, have you implemented multi-factor authentication? More or less, if you look at the cyber, third-party risk management questionnaires, that's probably a question that you're going to get, right? They won't ask you, uh, you know, ask to find out, have you implemented MFA where it really matters more than other areas, so to speak?
It is so frustrating
Yeah,
because I go to local security events too.
yeah,
Like your average ISSA or whatever events,
that's right.
and the way that they talk about multi-factor authentication just drives me absolutely nuts.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, there's no specific. So in a way, it's like too specific. Um, but yeah, but then on the other hand, it's like not specific enough either, right?
that's right. Right. So a good way to ascertain outcome is to simply ask a very metrics based question, right? And this is something that people should be able to access. As an example, like, once again, if you look up that open letter link,
Hmm.
I have some tables there in that open letter. So if you ask a question of a vendor or a third party in the form of a very objective metric, there is really no way for them to kind of skirt around the issue, right? They should be telling you exactly what they have done in terms of percentages for MFA, and then that should help you as a customer ask a follow-up question if needed, right? If it is less than, let's say, 100% for external facing systems, or systems processing sensitive data not having MFA, then you can exactly ask a question in terms of identifying as to what the vendor needs to do further, right? On the other hand, if you simply asked, have you implemented MFA, the vendor is going to say yes. They might be right in saying that, because they might have implemented MFA in one of the systems, and then you're going to the next question, right? So asking about the means of implementing MFA is not exactly useful. On the other hand, ascertaining outcomes in terms of metrics, risk-oriented metrics based on that risk-relevant framework that I was talking about earlier, maintained by the public-private partnership body, is going to result in much better outcomes in third-party risk management. Is my idea.
So maybe an outcome would be all databases that contain PII
Hmm.
require that any system administrator who has access be strongly authenticated with MFA.
That's
So
right.
you're sort of tying those things, tying sort of the resource and the action.
Yep.
Um, you know, um, well, I don't want to get digress on my capabilities versus how we're so abstracted from the capabilities that we focus on the people too much. And but maybe if we looked at the capabilities, understood the risk of that capability, then we could make our assertions more easily about our desired outcome, as you're calling it.
That's right.
Yeah,
So the the key difference between an outcome and means is outcome is something that you're able to measure and manage objectively, right, in a risk oriented fashion. On the other hand, means you're just simply implementing something, whether it's a technology, people, or process, and you
yeah,
really can demonstrate outcomes in an objective fashion, right?
right,
That's the key difference. So I'm suggesting third, all- third party risk management needs to be focused on ascertaining outcomes and not talking about or asking about means or the status of the means, so to speak. I think that's a very significant difference between the two. If we continue to focus on the means, which is largely the case in third party risk management practices today, we're not going to be really achieving the real outcome that we are looking for.
right. Well, the birds are flying, which means we're at 41 minutes. We could probably keep going for another hour or so because the content that you publish is really, really like deep. So I encourage the audience to dig into the homework. And then I have another section today, more links from Kamal. So there's a lot to catch up on if you haven't seen any of it. But no, that was really good. I think a good intro. And before we break, Kamal, do you have any last thoughts?
Um, Once again, thank you, Mike, for this opportunity, and again to the audience, watching now or that might be watching this in the future. Um, you know, cyber third-party risk management. I like to use the term cyber third-party risk management specifically because cyber third-party risk management is unlike third-party risk management in other uh, disciplines of risk, right, such as ESG or whatever that you might have. Uh, the principal difference between cyber third-party risk management and the other areas of TPRM is that cyber TPRM needs to be much more agile, because uh, the most important issue that we need to focus on today is to make sure that we don't end up on a headline tomorrow, right? So in that regard, cyber TPRM needs to be much more agile. It needs to be much more conscious about outcomes, achieving outcomes in time, and executing well towards those outcomes, right? Both us internally as customers, as well as allowing the third parties to do the same as well, right? If we diverted the attention and resources of third parties into doing things that are not exactly productive or counterproductive, those outcomes are going to suffer, right? That's simply the reality of what I refer to as cyber economics, right? You're going to divert resources, what really matters is going to suffer. And therefore I think cyber TPRM is extremely important. Any research or survey that you read today, I'm sure there's going to be a significant percentage of organizations that have encountered third party breaches, and it's not surprising, right? Because our third-party risk management practices today uh, haven't really, you know, evolved over time to address things that matter, right? And therefore, I like to talk about cyber TPRM as a topic pretty extensively in that regard, and I would certainly encourage the audience to reach out to me if you have any questions. And I post and write about the topic fairly frequently on LinkedIn as well. If you have any questions, critique, or thoughts, please feel free to reach out over LinkedIn. Uh, I should certainly be able to answer them, and please feel free to connect as well if you would like to.
Awesome. Um, and I will just quickly announce the next episode, um, Rise of Just-in-Time or JIT Access. I don't know if that's the right way to think about it. I don't know if I'm in that camp, but we'll hear that side of the argument. Quick reminder, if you enjoyed this episode or at least got something out of it, please follow us on LinkedIn or YouTube. Happy to announce we're up to 1,000 followers on YouTube, which I'd been ignoring. So now I'm going to mention it. LinkedIn or YouTube, either's fine. With that, I'll say, Kamal, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure reading your work and chatting with you today. And thanks, audience. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks